Head over to miniaturemarket.com where they have thousands of board games at discounted prices like Gloomy Graves. Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here. Today we live in a dark fantasy world where tons of corpses are piling up from cyclops and unicorns and goblins and all sorts of different fantasy creatures. And you're going to be trying to dig graves both in your own private crypt and in a communal graveyard to try to score points. It's pretty interesting how this works. You'll be working with players sometimes, sometimes not, sometimes cutting people off. Let me show you how this works. It's Gloomy Graves from Renegade Game Studios. I'll see you on the other side. The object of the game is to score the most points. Mainly you'll be doing this by creating grave sites of the same type that is large enough contiguously in order to score a certain amount of points. For example, if you make a grave of goblins that's 12 big, you'll be able to score 6 points, and so on and so forth. At the end of the game, you'll also be scoring points for the amount of these different scorecards you have, 3, 4, or 5 of them. The game is played over multiple rounds. Each round, players will take turns in clockwise manner, and each turn, a player will go through these 3 steps. First, they'll bury corpses, which essentially is just playing a card from your hand to both their private crypt and the communal graveyard in the middle. Then they might score graves, this is optional, and then you'll draw back up cards. So let's go through each of these. Now when you bury corpses, you'll be placing a card into the communal graveyard and one into your private crypt. It doesn't matter which order you do because you'll be doing both of those each turn. When you place a card, you're always placing it face up, and in the communal graveyard, you must cover half of another card. Notice that each card has 2 halves. You must cover exactly 1/2 of another card, like this. This is a perfect placement. In this case, we're trying to build up a large section of blue goblins. I could have done this if I wanted to, or I could have done something like this. Now, when placing to your own private crypt, when you place a card, it's going to be face up, and it can be adjacent. So I could place it next to it like this, or maybe like this if I want to. I could also cover half. So I could do something like this, just like we did in the communal graveyard. You could also, if you really wanted to, you could cover a card completely up like that. There's specific times where you'll want to do that. Why? Because your specific private crypt can never be bigger than a 3 by 3 grid. Meaning 1, 2, 3 by 1, 2, 3. Let me show you what that looks like in just a moment, but I want to point out that at this point now, we have 2 contiguous sort of grave sites of blue goblins. And in the communal graveyard, there's 3. Now you always count orthogonally up, down, left, right, never a diagonal. So we have 3 here, we had 2 in our private, that gives us 5 total. Now what you're trying to do is score points. That's the next phase of your turn. Is after you play both your cards, you can optionally score points if you can. In order to score, you have to have a certain amount, at least, of a type that's contiguous. Now we just said we had 5 of these. Once we have 8 or more, we're able to score this. So if there were 8 total between the communal graveyard and our private crypt, we could score this. We would just grab this card and put it in front of us. At the end of the game, it's worth 2 points. However, if we did that, we're foregoing getting any of these because you can only score each grave site once per game. And after you optionally score or not, and remember you can only score 1 grave card on your turn at most, you'll draw cards. You played 2 cards, so you're simply going to pick up 2 cards. You can take them from the open display here or from the top of the deck. If you take one from the display, it immediately gets replaced by the top card of the deck, and you can make your next choice, like let's say maybe then we take that one, and this gets filled up. Then it'll be the next player's turn clockwise. Now, one thing I haven't told you yet is this is a Gravedigger. These are wild. So if we look at contiguous goblins, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, once your private crypt is a full 3 by 3, that's when you'll notice that pretty much every card you place now is going to be totally covering another card. Now, speaking of this placement, if I had just scored a bunch of blue goblins, my next turn it'd be advantageous for me to break this up because other players are probably trying to piggyback on this large communal grave site with a lot of the different blue goblins. So over the course of the game, you'll be finding the right times to piggyback on what other players are doing, and then after you score, trying to break that up so other players can't score quite as much. Now, players will continue taking turns until one of 2 things happens. Either a player gets all 5 scoring cards, meaning 1 from each grave site type, remember because you can only have as maximum 1 of each type, or when a player needs to draw cards but the deck is empty. Then each player is going to tally their points by adding the points on the graves for each of the scorecards that they've got. In this case, I have 16. And then you're going to score 5, 10, or 15 points, whether you have 3, 4, or 5 of these scorecards. In this case, we have 3, so we have 5 more points for a total of 21. If there's a tie, the players that are tied compare their highest scoring card. If it's still tied, you go down to the next lowest one, and so on and so forth until you break the tie. All right, there's Gloomy Graves. This game has simple rules, but plenty to think about. Essentially, you're playing 2 cards and drawing 2 cards. That's pretty much all you're doing on your turn. 1 to the communal, 1 to the private crypt, draw 2 cards. Very simple, but how you do it, when you do it, the spatial puzzle of both of these, working with people, working against people, makes this a game that has great decisions. The communal graveyard and the private crypt are cool because they both, you're trying to score in the same sort of ways, combining your scores between both of them, but they both work very differently in how you can place on them. You know, the communal you're placing just on one, the other one you can play in your own, you can place, you know, adjacent or completely cover a card or do over one. So different placement rules, they work sort of differently. I like with that communal one that oftentimes you'll be working with other players to score at times. You'll both be putting goblins down there and trying to get it bigger and bigger so you can score. But then once you score, you're going to want to cut it off and cut other players off in that communal graveyard. Or if you're working with somebody else, a third player or fourth player might come in and try to cut you guys off to build, you know, maybe they don't have something that they're building towards or the right cards for that, but they'll cut you off. And it's a very sort of mean game where you're trying to sometimes work with other players, sometimes not, sometimes working with them just to the point where you score, then cutting them off, sometimes just stopping players as they're trying to build something big. You're trying to mess people over a lot in this game in that communal graveyard. It's a combative aspect I typically like in games. You got to know when to score and when to push for more, because you might have 8 of a certain thing. You might be like, you know what, let me get this 2-point card. But you're like, oh, you know what, I've got a lot of these cards in my hand. There's some out there. I could probably build for some more, but you got to watch what other players are doing. Are they going to start cutting you off? Things like that. Do I want to push my luck to try to, I've already got 8. Can I get to 10? Can I get to 12? It's going to be a lot more points just to get 2 more. And so that sort of decision making is fun in this game. This game has a similar feeling to King Domino, where you're building, like in your own thing, you're building a 3x3 grid here. King Domino, it's like more like a 5x5 or a 7x7. And this has a similar feeling where you're trying to figure out the right way to build things. Although here you can build on top of things in your own crypt, which makes it a little bit easier, but it's also a lot tighter. But it has more going on, I'd say, than King Domino does. But it does have that sort of feeling to it. If you like King Domino, I think you'll probably like this. This also has a similar feel to Renegade's release 2 years ago, Gunky Mono, which was a reprint of Heartland, which is, Gunky Mono I think is one of the most underrated games out there. It's definitely one of Renegade's most underrated games. It's an amazing game, get it. This was essentially originally the Heartland, the card game, that got turned into, you know, this Gloomy Graves. So essentially this could easily be Gunky Mono, the card game. So if you've played Gunky Mono or Heartland, feels similar to that, but yet different enough because there's, again, you've got private crypt and graveyard and the communal graveyard. So if you liked Gunky Mono, you're going to want to check this one out too. On the negative side, personally, this is a personal thing, I don't enjoy the theme. I don't like dark fantasy worlds that much. It doesn't do anything for me. But it's also very abstracted. So for those that are looking for a thematic game, the theme could have been anything. So there's really no theme here. Even though I don't like it, I'll just brush it under the carpet because it's really just colors that you're abstractly putting together in this game. Also, the game, because it is so combative, is very mean, and it might be too mean for some. If you don't like getting messed over and people stomping on the communal graveyard, messing up your points, you're not going to like this. But if you like kind of working together with some and then find the right time to stab each other in the back, you're going to like this game a lot. I really like this game, so it's going to be hanging around in my gaming library. So it is going to get a saxophone serenade. It's been the Game Boy Geek, breaking down barriers, growing relationships through board games by helping you find the next one you'll love. Did you miss the Game Topper 2.0 Kickstarter? Have no fear, it's not too late to get in on the ultimate gaming accessory. Convert your table into a high-quality gaming table with a fully portable game topper system and take advantage of some of the best 3mm premium gaming mats in the industry. New styles, new sizes, and new accessories can be yours. Upgrade every game you play by late backing now at GameToppersLLC.com.